Hello everybody, today I'm going to have a look at Carol Ann Duffy's poem Valentine, taken from the EDUQAS and Edexcel GCSE Poetry Anthologies for English Literature. Now before we get started, I really want you to think about the traditional images that we associate with Valentine's and Valentine's Day. Roses, cards, rings, chocolates, hearts, heart-shaped boxes of chocolates. I dare say that a lot of these images on this opening slide really ring true with what we would commonly associate with Valentine's Day. Perhaps apart from this image of an onion here. And what Carol Ann Duffy attempts to do, quite audaciously in this poem, is argue that an onion has a lot more in common with love than any of these fake and artificial symbols. Valentine is what we would describe as a subversive poem. It attempts to challenge our preconceived ideas and expectations of what love is. Now, before I pick the poem apart and go through each stanza, I do want to run through a little bit of context. Carol Ann Duffy is a contemporary poet. That means a modern poet. She was born in Glasgow in 1955, and in 2009 she was appointed as the first female poet laureate. Has since been taken over by Simon Armitage, but her poem is noted for dealing with quite complex issues such as gender, oppression, violence, but in an accessible and easy to read style of language. Her poems often criticise society's materialistic views, and she does also often write from a personal perspective. It is also worth noting that Duffy is openly lesbian, so again, perhaps hinting at this non-traditional form of love. And she's really, again, trying to argue that love is something a lot more complex and also something a lot more meaningful than just superficial tokens. Duffy herself has said that she likes to use simple words but in a complicated way, and I really want you to bear this quote in mind when we look at the poem, because as I've said, it's a poem that is quite accessible and easy to read, but it deals with quite complex themes and attempts to challenge our traditional ideas of what love is and what love represents. So the poem essentially is about a speaker who is giving a gift to their partner, but rather than giving a traditional Valentine's gift, as some of the ones that we looked at on the first slide, their gift is an onion. And essentially the rest of the poem attempts to explain why this onion is a more appropriate symbol of love than these other gifts. Now the poem begins in quite striking and unusual fashion. Not a red rose or a satin heart. What a quite odd way to start a poem entitled Valentine. This word not immediately establishes an assertive and negative tone which contrasts with the poem's title. And it is immediately clear that this is not going to be your everyday soppy traditional love poem. And these images here of the red rose and the satin heart, these are two stereotypical, cliched symbols of love. And here in this opening line, the speaker is implying that they just simply lack meaning. So, not a red rose or a satin heart, I give you an onion. Now here we are introduced to the key extended metaphor of the poem, which is obviously linking this onion to love. It is a moon wrapped in brown paper. Now here we can see that the onion is quite a plain and unsentimental gift. It's not dressed up, there's no bow on it, and we've got this clever image of saying that it's wrapped in brown paper, linking the onion obviously linking to the image of the onion and its skin. So it's not a dressed up gift, it's not a fancy gift, but it is a moon wrapped in brown paper. Now a moon, or the moon should I say, it has always been a traditional symbol of love and fertility all throughout literature and the ages, and it promises light. Now I'll leave it up to you whether you think that this is said in quite ironic fashion, and whether this promise of light is a false, ultimately a false promise. But it promises light like the careful undressing of love. Now, this is a quite delicate image, really. We wouldn't really commonly expect careful and undressing to be paired together, but it's a delicate image that hints at sexual love and physical intimacy. But really, the key part of this opening is establishing this key extended metaphor that links love with the onion. Here, it will blind you with tears like a lover. Now, we can actually visualize here the speaker of the poem handing over this onion to their lover. Here, take it. It will blind you with tears like a lover. Now, what a striking simile again, that implies that love can often be quite a sad experience. We get the impression that the speaker actually has an idea and has a knowledge of the pain of lost love. And it again quite cleverly links the onion with love. Obviously, many people, when chopping an onion, start tearing up. And again, we've got this link between the tears that you would get from chopping an onion with the tears that you will get when love goes wrong. Now, in these words here in blue, blind and grief, this quite negative language is quite strongly opposing to what we would normally associate with traditional Valentine's Day messages. And the fact that love can blind you is something that's also quite significant, that you can't see straight, that you can't see correctly when you're overwhelmed by love. It will make your reflection a wobbling photo of grief. So I think this image is really quite a vivid one, really. If you can imagine the tears streaming down someone's face and perhaps looking in the mirror and just seeing this wobbling reflection due to the immense streams of tears. And here the speaker says, I'm trying to be truthful. I'm trying to tell you the true meaning of love. It's not all positive. It's actually something that's quite complex and can be quite a roller coaster of emotions. So here we've got the first person pronoun, I am trying to be truthful. So again, it adds a personal tone to this poem. So the speaker is trying to find this true meaning of love. So it will blind you with tears like a lover is really one of those key quotes to remember from this poem. So again, showing that love is not just something that is a positive emotion. Not a cute card or a kissogram. So again, once we move on, we get a callback, an echo of this first line that again rejects these superficial tokens of love. The idea of a kissogram really now is something that's really quite outdated. Go and Google that if you don't know what a kissogram is. But not a cute card or a kissogram. This alliteration, cute card, kissogram, makes these symbols seem somewhat overly sentimental, and this really can make the narrator seem quite disdainful towards them. So again, as I mentioned in the last stanza, the speaker is trying to find this true meaning of love, and they're saying that real love is something a lot more complex and more meaningful than these superficial and artificial tokens. I give you an onion. Its fierce kiss will stay on your lips. Now, this is quite a powerful adjective. It suggests a degree of passion, a fierce kiss, but also danger. And the idea of the onion staying on your lips and saying that love stays on your lips like an onion. And that's a fantastic pairing of ideas. If ever you were to bite into a raw onion, which I wouldn't suggest, then its taste and its scent will literally cling to you. It will stick to you. And love can be something that can fill you with overwhelming enjoyment, but also when it goes a bit wrong, it can leave you with that bitter taste. Possessive and faithful. Now these are two kind of byproducts of love, really. That a negative byproduct is that we can become clingy, we can become possessive when we are overwhelmed by emotions. And faithful we normally commonly associate with a positive aspect of love, of being faithful to one another. So I give you an onion, its fierce kiss will stay on your lips, possessive and faithful, as we are, for as long as we are. Again, said with a degree of sarcasm almost here. Quite a sardonic tone to this. As we are, for as long as we are. So here we see that love can have a lasting effect for both good and bad. And this last line, for as long as we are, is an acknowledgement that love can be something that's transient and only temporary. It might be something that doesn't always last forever. And there is a strange echoing here of the wedding vows, for as long as we both shall live, for as long as we are. So it's this admission here that modern day love is quite complex, and it's not always going to be this positive and long lasting thing that we traditionally think of. Take it. Its platinum loops shrink to a wedding ring, if you like. So again, this offer of an onion that's like here, and now it's take it. This offer of an onion now becomes a command in this final stanza. So again, we've got this short line, quite emphatic line that creates a forceful tone. Its platinum loops shrink to a wedding ring, if you like. Lethal. Its scents will cling to your fingers, cling to your knife. Okay, so these platinum loops shrink to a wedding ring, if you like. Now, obviously, when we're chopping an onion, it can be cut into rings, which are obviously being linked to a wedding ring. But notice this verb, shrink. It's quite restrictive, isn't it? The loops shrinking to a wedding ring, perhaps implying that marriage and the idea of long-term relationships in that form can be quite restrictive and perhaps hold people back. This if you like, it's conditional. The idea of a wedding ring is introduced hesitantly. Okay, and maybe here Duffy is implying that it can be something that people rush into a little bit too much. But this verb shrink is really quite significant in being something that's quite restrictive. Lethal. Its scent will cling to your fingers, cling to your knife. Now, lethal here is emphatic. It is alone in an end-stop line, just like here and take it. So perhaps here Duffy is showing that love can be something that can be dangerous, it can hurt, and perhaps even kill. Now, as I've said about the complexity of love, the onion is a symbol of many layers. It is something with many layers to it, which makes it an even more fitting symbol of the complex nature of love. Its scent will cling to your fingers and cling to your knife. So here, this word cling and this repetition of cling emphasizes a degree of inescapability, perhaps a bit like the wedding ring shrinking. And again, we've got this repetition of cling. We've got references to being possessive. Okay, and it again perhaps highlights how love can be possessive, quite restrictive, and even quite suffocating in some instances. So really powerful and quite ambiguous ending to this poem about it clinging to your knife. Obviously a knife being used to chop onions, as I've spoken about before, but this is perhaps an indication that love can have the power to wound and to hurt. So just like the scent of an onion will stay on your lips and stay and cling to your knife, so can love. So just to finish up on the form of the poem, as I've said, it's a modern and contemporary poem, and it's also written in free verse, which means that it doesn't have a regular rhyme scheme or structure. It's also written from a first-person perspective, so the pronoun I is used throughout, which adds to the personal and somewhat confessional tone of the poem. And because it's written in free verse, and it's written from a first-person perspective, it almost feels as if we are eavesdropping on a conversation between these two lovers, which again adds a degree of authenticity to the poem. You'll see that the lines are of irregular length and that there's also several spaces between these individual lines, which makes the poem disjointed and creates awkward pauses, perhaps reflecting the complexity of modern love. So altogether, the poem's form reflects the changing expectations of relationships in the modern world, and it explores the complexity of love. So it's therefore quite fitting that this is a free verse poem that doesn't adhere to traditional and strict rhyme schemes or a strict particular structure. Now, there are various feelings and attitudes explored within this poem. If we look at love, we perhaps see love as something that we wouldn't normally traditionally expect. We see love as something that can wound, can hurt, something that can be fierce and possessive, but also something that can be faithful. With regards to honesty, the speaker almost seems to take pride in their honesty and their intent on finding the true nature of love. And above all, this poem dismisses those traditional tokens of love, such as the kissogram, the cute card, the satin heart, and the red rose, and say the speaker implies that they lack meaning and don't really say anything about the true nature of love. And towards the end of the poem, there is a growing sense of danger. Think about the clinging to the knife and that line lethal. But this is only implied, again, perhaps highlighting how love can not only hurt, but it can wound and cause harm. Now, really what we see in this poem is the conflict between realism and idealism. Duffy is trying to present to us a realistic and honest presentation of love. Okay, and this contrasts heavily with a poem such as Sonnet 43 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning that presents an idealistic and traditional form of love. So when you're thinking about comparing this poem, we want to think about. Now, a central conflict within this poem is that between realism and idealism, and what Duffy presents to us in Valentine is an unflinching, realistic and honest depiction of love. And when we think about comparing this poem with other love poems in the anthology, a good poem to pick would be Sonnet 43 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which is your archetypal idealistic love poem. It even uses a traditional poetical form in the sonnet to get its ideas across, and we think about contrasting that with Duffy, who uses free verse and an irregular structure to represent the complexity of love. So interrogating this conflict between realism and idealism is a very good way to go about your comparisons with other poems and Valentine.